just finished my game. Round 2 just happened in Sunway Formentera, and what a game it was. Let's talk about it. So in round 2, I faced Tarjei Joten Svensen. I am actually quite familiar with him because I've seen him post a lot of stuff on Twitter. He's a chess journalist, and it's always nice to see his posts because he always posts things regarding chess, so always nice to catch up with his tweets and stuff. But yeah, today we were facing each other at the chessboard. So his rating is 2050, and I was really excited to play him. So the one thing that did not excite me was, of course, the move d4 that he played. I was expecting this, and I thought, okay, he hasn't really played much actively recently, and that's why it was a bit difficult to properly prepare. I did check some of his online games, and I thought, okay, let's just play d5, knight f3, knight f6, c4, and c6. So now we're in the Slav defense variation, knight c3, and here I went for g6. I tried to do different lines against d4, but today I thought let's try this line again. And after e3, we turn into some sort of Slav Schlechter variation. I don't have any idea how to pronounce this other than I think of it in Dutch, and then it gets very confusing in English. Anyway, bishop g7, bishop d3, short castle, h3. So my opponent is stopping me from playing bishop g4 because I have the short castle. That is what I want to play to get rid of my light squared bishop, take the knight off the board, and I'm okay with losing the pair of bishops because my bishop, the light squared bishop, is not the greatest in this position. But if your opponent plays h3, you don't have this opportunity anymore. So that's why instead I play b6, short castle, bishop b7, b3, and here I played c5. Up until here, I guess I prepared it. I saw all sorts of different lines, and I remembered this pretty vaguely from my preparation. And yeah, I wasn't sure if this was actually going to happen on the board, but when it happened, I was pretty confident that I knew what I was doing. And yeah, I played c5, the reason that, so if d takes c5, let's say, then I can play knight e4. And apparently it's not that bad for white, but of course there's so much happening on this diagonal, and white will lose material one way or the other. And there's knight takes d5, so you can't take the rook just yet because there's a lot of complications happening here with the knight hanging on e4 as well. But after knight takes c5, black has quite a pleasant position. So that's why, yeah, d takes c5 is not really played here. My opponent went for c takes d5, and I was pretty, yeah, happy with this because I can take on d4, e takes d4, knight takes d5, and here I'm facing the isolated queen's pawn. And I'm pretty confident about my chances here because usually when you have the isolated queen's pawn, you want to start attacking your opponent on their king side. But my king is extremely safe here. I don't see any attack happen here with this wall of pawns and bishop on g7 sitting there like a monster. So I was pretty certain that, you know, I was doing a good job and I must be slightly better here at least. My opponent took on d5. And here I spent quite some time actually because I was hesitating, do I take with the queen or with the bishop? Because both moves look good. But in the end, I went for bishop takes d5. The reason is because I didn't like how vulnerable the queen would become here on d5. Moves such as rook e1 arise, the attack is starting here on the pawn on e7. Bishop e4 is also some sort of threat. And yeah, I can see my opponent activate their pieces pretty easily. Bishop a3 also incoming, and yeah, the pawn on e7 is just feeling very uncomfortable. So anyway, that's why I took on d5 the bishop. Bishop b2 was played, and here knight c6. I'm simply developing, and here knight e5. I did expect knight e5, but yeah, I expected it, and I wasn't entirely sure what to do about it. So I was spending a little bit of time here because I really wanted to take on e5, but then now I thought I would be helping my opponent to fix their pawn structure, sort of, and I wasn't entirely sure if this was a good idea to step into this endgame because the pawn on e5 may appear to be pushed too much, and then it can also become a weakness. But I feel like it is white that is playing here for something. Suddenly my bishop on g7 is not that great anymore, and this bishop isn't doing much better on b2. I believe my opponent mentioned here, after the game, my opponent actually asked if I looked at knight takes d4. I remember looking at it briefly. I believe it was in this position. And yeah, I did consider this, but what I didn't like when calculating was bishop takes d4, let's say bishop takes g2. And for some reason, I just didn't like this at all. I'm not entirely sure. Yeah, I was calculating some lines, but for some reason, I just didn't like it. I was trying to make it work, but I couldn't really find the right moves. Apparently, king takes g2 is the move that should be played here. Queen takes d4, and there's an attack on the knight and the rook over here. But I thought the knight can simply move, and then I wasn't sure what is happening here with the piece being traded off. And I did see this position, but I thought 2 pieces against the rook, I don't like that. I don't like that. I get sick when I see that, especially when I'm the one with 2 rooks. We all know how good I treat rooks, right? How well I treat them. Anyway, so I didn't go for this line, but apparently, just to go back real quick, in this line, there was apparently, instead of knight f3, white can play f4 here, and white is completely fine. So this is completely crazy. Anyway, this did not happen. I played knight d4 instead because I thought, okay, I have a better position, and I want to play against that isolated queen's pawn. I also remember when checking the games of my opponent, that my opponent was pretty tactical. He saw some really nice tactical ideas, and I thought, okay, maybe I should try to avoid tactics because I may miss something and my opponent may spot it, and then I may get into trouble somehow. So I thought, okay, maybe I should try to play more positionally, and that's also why I sort of adjusted my playstyle, which you will notice in the next few moves. I'm trying to avoid any sort of tactical nuances, tactical situations. So bishop c4 was played, bishop takes c4. I spent some time because I want to take on e5, but I wasn't sure what the best way is. Do I take on c4 first or no? So if bishop takes e5 here, d takes e5, bishop takes c4 is really nice for me because those pawns on c4 and e5 are pretty weak. But what I wasn't sure about is what happens after bishop takes d5. And turns out that I could have given a check, king takes, and then take on d5. But yeah, I don't know. For some reason, I didn't play this. I thought, let's just take on c4, because if my opponent takes with the knight, well, I guess we just proceed. We traded off one pair of bishops, and yeah, I thought that isn't my favorite to trade pieces, because in the endgame, that pawn becomes even weaker. So yeah, I was happy to trade pieces. B takes c4 was played, and in the end, we managed to get into the same position. And here I went for knight d3 because I want to attack that bishop on b2 and put pressure on the pawn on e5, and I thought I want to sort of control the position. Queen e2 was played, I take on b2, queen takes, queen c7, and here I'm just trying to play on the, well, can you call this a weakness? I guess, on the 2 weaknesses in the position. E5 is not a big weakness, but in order to protect it with the pawn, you have to play f4, and then the king may become weak. So you don't really want to play f4 so quickly. Rook c1 was played, rook d8, and of course, this is preventing my opponent from playing rook d1 because takes, and then the pawn on c4 is hanging. So that's why I'm restricting my opponent from actually developing over here. e6 was played. This came as a bit of a surprise. I did consider this move, but I thought, okay, I'm not too worried about this because I'm playing f6. I don't want to take that pawn because that ruins my pawn structure, and that's exactly what my opponent wants. I want to keep things close, and this pawn is now officially a huge weakness. So I thought I should be happy here. Queen e2, rook d4. Of course, it's still not easy to play here, but yeah, I'm just going to try to improve my position every single move. I play rook d4 because I want to double the rooks on the d file. So rook d8, rook takes, and g3 here. So here, of course, I'm in better position, but how to proceed? So I guess there's like many ideas one can have here. You can try to fix the pawn on c4 to prepare b5 and win it. You can try to play on the e6 pawn, try to attack it. You also need to take care of the king. Maybe the king needs some safety, so you need to play king g7 at some point. I went for queen c6 with the idea that I want to play rook e4. And if my opponent tries to defend it, well, this rook can't move because the pawn will be hanging on c4. And if f3, then g3 is a huge weakness. I simply play queen d6 and white can almost resign because rook d2 and it's just over. This king is just a really sad king. So that's why, I was pretty, confident about my chances here. My opponent went for c5. And I think it's a practically good move because white is realizing that they're going to lose a pawn. And if you're going to lose a pawn, you want to lose a pawn in the best possible way, right? You want to have chances still. And I feel like this is practically pretty good because this pawn on e6 is pretty painful. And I still have to play really carefully. Even though the computer says this is -4 almost, I don't see the -4. But okay, I take the pawn, queen b2, I defend because queen takes d4 was a threat, and also queen is incoming here on the 8th rank, so that's why I play queen b6, queen a3, and I was actually feeling like I'm losing the thread or something because queen a3 is a really sneaky move. I can't play c4 because then the pawn on e7 is hanging and I'm actually lost. So I have to play really precise here, and yeah, I really want to play c4, but if I can't play c4, then it means I can't really make progress. So I was like, okay, I have to play rook d5, queen e4, and king g7. So I'm stepping out of the check on the 8. So logically you would say, hey, let's just take the pawn on e6. But then I lose a pawn on a7, or there's a check. Well, I guess taking on a7 would be much better. And yeah, this is not that clear for me. It's not so clear, not easy to win. So since I'm attacking this pawn and it's really difficult to defend this pawn altogether, I'm just playing king g7 because if my opponent plays queen e8 now, I can just take the pawn and everything is safe. So that's why I'm not too worried about this. But what happens after, let's say, h4? Here I was struggling to find an idea because what do? If I move my queen, I lose a pawn on a7, which is why I played a6. So now I can actually take the pawn on the next move. Rook e1 was played, my opponent is defending the pawn, and now I'm able to play queen b4. I'm basically forcing the queen trade, which is pretty nice because in the rook endgame I should be completely winning with this weakness on e6, and I have a pass pawn on c5, so I should be able to be up 2 pawns at some point. Rook e4, queen takes, rook d6, of course I have to defend the pawn on a6, and I'm attacking the pawn on e6, rook c4, rook c6, g4. So my opponent is trying to fix the pawn structure on the king side so that I cannot access this pawn with my king. I want to play king f6, king takes e6. But if I play f5 now, then g5, and it's a little bit tricky. Should still be winning, but it will take a lot of time and effort. I play g5 here. I want to stop my opponent from playing g5, and my opponent went for king g2. Really clever move, but I still take on h4, king h3, king g6, king takes h4, and here I play f5. So I want to go to e6 still. g5, and now I thought it's a time to take on e6 because after rook takes c5, rook e4 check, king g3, king takes g5, I took the pawn on g5 and I am now up 2 pawns. But rook a5, rook e6, f4 check, and I have to retreat. And here I was thinking, after king h4 especially, did I spoil my win somewhere? Is this endgame still winning? I'm up 2 pawns, but in rook endgames, it's so common that there are some sort of fortresses happening, where if you move your rook, you will lose a pawn, and then it becomes only 1 pawn difference, and then it becomes easier to draw. There are so many situations in the rook endgames where this happens. So I was really getting nervous here, like, what is going on? I mean, am I still winning? Like, did I spoil it? I don't know. Fortunately, I had so much time on the clock to figure everything out. In this position, we crossed move 40 already, so I'm now on 42 minutes, which is really rare for my doing. But yeah, I didn't really have any sort of time trouble in this game, so that was really nice. But my opponent did not have so much time and trouble either, but towards the 40th move, he was around 2 minutes, so he had to play a little fast towards the end of the first time control. But yeah, anyway, we're in this position now. I played king g6 because I thought, okay, I don't want to allow any sort of king h5. I just want to stop this king and we'll see. I have all the time in the world. Rook a3, rook c6. My opponent's not doing anything anyway. Rook e3, king f6, rook a3, e6. So this position was actually really interesting because now is the question, what do you do here? You only have two moves basically. I mean, all the other moves don't make much sense because you're not making any progress. You need to play here either e6 or e5. And I was thinking I spent a lot of time here because I was not sure what I do here. What am I supposed to do? So since my rook is stuck, of course the first instinct idea that comes to mind, I want to play e5. But the problem is after playing e5, f takes e5, king takes e5, and because of my endgame studies, the endgame book that I went through the past month, I remembered that f and h pawns, when they are disconnected exactly like this, are painful to win. And I was thinking like, okay, I remember there are some situations that are winning, but I don't even remember which ones. And then I thought, yeah, Anna, bad idea. Very bad idea. But it was so tempting. I really want to play e5 because what else do I have? If I don't play e5, then I basically need to time it correctly, or what else do I have? And that's when I realized, okay, I went back to e6 and I played it. King g3, and now I thought h5. I'm sacrificing the h pawn to capture the pawn on f4. Let me show you how that happened. So the king goes to h4. If my opponent doesn't do anything, at some point I'll play h4, rook c4. At some point I will be able to time things correctly. So all I need is a little bit of patience. But my opponent went for king h4 directly. It's not like my opponent has many moves left, right? Rook c4, rook takes a6, rook takes f4. So here I sacrificed the h and a pawn, the two pawns that are often very useless in rook endgames. But yeah, I got rid of them and I took the pawn on f4, and now I have two connected passed pawns. But my opponent has a pawn on a2. And here I was thinking, is this still winning or not? Because I was overthinking so much in this position. I'm down to 22 minutes, so I have a lot of time to figure things out. But I started to get slightly worried because I thought, did I spoil the win? Am I still winning? I don't know. I couldn't tell. I couldn't figure it out. But I thought, if anything, I have to play rook g4. I don't know exactly what is going on, but I have to play rook g4 because I want to cut off this king at all costs. This pawn, if it wants to run, it will run. So if the king is cut off, at least I'll be able to push the pawn at some point. But I need to figure out how, because now if I play f4, I lose the rook, right? So a4 was played, rook g8. I put the rook back on the 8th rank, but the reason that I don't want my opponent to play rook a8, because then rook f8 might be really annoying to deal with, this check on f8, and that's what I wanted to prevent. So I put the rook on g8, and I'm also covering the promotion square of the pawn. King h4, f4. Now I'm just simply pushing the pawn, and the king is supporting it. My opponent has to be careful because I'm threatening checkmate right now, so the king has to go to h3. e5, I'm simply pushing the pawns together because if I push one pawn too far, then I might lose it. So I have to be really careful. a5, f3, rook b7, king f4, and I'm just slowly moving forward. And after a7, king e2, this is the moment that my opponent resigned. So yeah, I'm super happy about this win. It felt pretty intense. It was a pretty, I don't know, it felt like it was a bit difficult, or I had a tough time converting it. But when I saw the analysis afterwards, I was so happy because I basically didn't really do much wrong. I played a perfect game, almost perfect, I would say. And I was so happy to have won this rook endgame. I was very unsure at some point if I was going to win this one. But yeah, seeing that it was actually all winning towards the end made me really happy because, yeah, during the game I was not so sure. So we win round 2. It feels so nice to win a game again. It's been so long. So super excited for tomorrow's game. Thank you so much for watching. Hope to see you in the next video.